The cafeteria went silent the moment the metal tray hit the floor. Everyone watched as three well-known prison bullies surrounded a frail-looking old man, his hands trembling slightly as he bent down to pick up his tray. But before he could reach it, the biggest bully kicked it further across the room and said, "Oops, must have slipped." Here's what nobody knew. The old man wasn't trembling out of fear, he was calculating. And what he was about to reveal would change the entire prison forever. If this story has you hooked, subscribe to Behind Bars Tales right now for more incredible true stories from inside America's prison system. And drop a comment below telling us what country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community. Now, let's dive into Harold's story. Riverside Correctional Facility in upstate New York was a place where reputation meant everything. The concrete walls, razor wire fences, and steel bars created more than physical barriers. They formed an ecosystem where strength equaled survival and weakness invited predation. If you looked strong, you survived. If you looked weak, you became a target. And Harold Grant, age 68, with his oversized glasses, slow shuffle, and slight tremor in his hands, looked like the perfect victim. He arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in November, processed through intake with the same quiet efficiency that would characterize his entire time at Riverside. The guards barely glanced at his file. White-collar crime, they assumed, maybe fraud or tax evasion. Nothing violent. Nothing that would cause problems. No one knew his charges. No one cared. In prison, your past mattered less than your present, and presently, Harold Grant appeared to be exactly what he looked like. A harmless old man who'd made some mistake and would serve his time reading books in the corner. The only thing inmates noticed was how he kept to himself, always reading thick paperbacks with worn covers, always calm even during the chaos of count time or meal distribution. He moved slowly through the corridors, his gait suggesting arthritis or old injuries. He spoke softly when spoken to, never making eye contact longer than necessary. That calmness, that unwillingness to assert himself, irritated a group led by Marcus "Brick" Sutton, the biggest bully on C Block. Brick was 34 years old, 6'3", 240 pounds of muscle earned through years of prison yard workouts. He was serving 12 years for armed robbery and had spent the last 5 establishing himself as the dominant force in his section of Riverside. Brick loved the feeling of control, the way other inmates stepped aside when he walked past, the respect, or fear, he didn't care which, that his reputation commanded. Harold looked like someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone who would cower and beg. Someone Brick could use to remind everyone exactly who ran C Block. Perfect. It started small, as these things always do in prison. Testing boundaries. Establishing dominance. A shove in the hallway as Harold carried his laundry to the communal washing machines. Brick's shoulder connecting with Harold's, sending the old man stumbling against the concrete wall, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "Watch where you're going, old man," Brick said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Harold simply adjusted his glasses, gathered his dropped items, and continued walking without a word. A loud laugh behind him in the chow line, Brick's voice carrying across the cafeteria, "Hey guys, check out Grandpa. Probably forgot where he parked his walker." The other inmates laughed, some genuinely amused, others simply relieved they weren't the target. Harold collected his tray of food and found a quiet corner table without reacting to the mockery. A stolen dessert from his tray during dinner, Brick's massive hand reaching across and taking Harold's small cup of vanilla pudding. "Thanks, Pops. You're watching your sugar anyway, right?" Harold looked at the empty space where his dessert had been, then back at his book, and continued reading while eating the rest of his meal. To the bullies, this meant they had full control. Harold was exactly what he appeared. Weak, scared, unwilling to defend himself. The perfect victim. But the guards noticed something strange. Officer Patricia Chen, a 12-year veteran of Riverside's correctional staff, mentioned it to her colleague during a shift change. "You notice that new guy, Harold Grant? Brick's been harassing him for 2 weeks now." Her colleague nodded. "Old guy doesn't seem to react much." "That's what's weird," Chen said. "Every time it happens, he doesn't flinch, doesn't panic, doesn't even seem surprised. He just handles it and moves on. Maybe he's been in before?" Knows how prison works. Chen shook her head slowly. I looked at his file. First offense. No priors. Clean record his whole life until whatever brought him here. But he acts like he's seen this before, many times. The officer filed the observation away and continued her rounds. In a facility housing 800 inmates, you couldn't monitor everyone's interactions. As long as it didn't escalate to violence requiring intervention, prison politics were left to sort themselves out. The cafeteria incident became the turning point, the moment when the carefully controlled dynamic began to shift in ways no one anticipated. It was a Thursday morning, breakfast time. Harold had collected his tray, powdered eggs, toast, weak coffee, and was making his way to his usual corner table when Brick decided to make a public spectacle. The big man stuck out his foot as Harold passed. The old man stumbled, his tray tilting dangerously but not quite falling. Harold managed to right himself, but the near fall drew attention. Careful there, Grandpa, Brick said loudly. Floors can be slippery. Harold continued toward his table, but Brick wasn't finished. He stood and deliberately bumped Harold hard, sending the tray flying. It hit the concrete floor with a metallic crash, eggs and toast scattering, coffee spreading in a brown puddle. The cafeteria went silent. Over 200 inmates watched to see how this would play out. Everyone expected Harold to back down, to apologize, to scurry away humiliated while Brick enjoyed his victory. But instead, Harold bent down to pick up his tray. And before he could reach it, Brick kicked it further across the room. Oops, Brick said with exaggerated innocence. Must have slipped. Harold straightened up slowly, adjusted his glasses with one finger, and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. Not angry, not scared, just observing. Like a scientist studying an interesting specimen. The silence stretched for 5, then 10 seconds. Long enough for Brick to feel it. That uncomfortable sensation when dominance doesn't land the way it should. Harold finally spoke, his voice quiet but perfectly clear. I'd appreciate it if you didn't do that again. The cafeteria erupted with laughter. The old man had actually said I'd appreciate it, like he was asking someone to pass the salt instead of confronting a man who could break him in half. Brick's face flushed red. The laughter made him look weak, and weakness was death in prison. He had to reassert control immediately and dramatically. He shoved Harold hard with both hands, sending him stumbling backward. The old man caught himself on a table edge, his body absorbing the impact with surprising grace. But his face stayed calm. Almost too calm. Not the face of someone terrified or humiliated. The face of someone waiting, calculating, processing. And for just a moment, a heartbeat, really. Brick saw something in those eyes behind the oversized glasses. Something that made his confidence waver. Then the moment passed. Harold collected himself, retrieved his tray from where it had slid, and walked calmly to the serving line to request a replacement breakfast. The kitchen staff, who'd watched the entire exchange, silently prepared another tray. As Harold carried his new breakfast to a different table and began eating as if nothing had happened, the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal noise level. But conversations were different now. Quieter. More thoughtful. Because something had shifted in that moment, though no one could quite identify what. Later that night, Harold's cellmate, Tommy Chen, no relation to Officer Patricia Chen, couldn't contain his concern any longer. Tommy was 26 years old, serving 3 years for drug possession. He was a slight young man who'd learned quickly to keep his head down, avoid the gangs, and count the days until release. Getting assigned to cell with the quiet old man had seemed like a blessing. No drama, no demands, no danger. But now Tommy was worried. Old man, he whispered after lights out, his voice barely audible in the darkness. You gotta tell the guards about Brick. These guys, they don't stop. They escalate. I've seen it before. First it's shoving and stealing food. Then it's beatings. Sometimes worse. Harold was lying on his bunk, hands folded on his chest, staring at the ceiling where shadows played in the dim light from the corridor. They are children, Harold said softly. Tommy frowned in the darkness. What? Brick's bigger than both of us combined. Size doesn't equal maturity, Harold replied. They're children acting out because no one ever taught them better. You don't fight children, Tommy. You teach them. Tommy shifted on his bunk, completely confused. Teach them what? Harold closed his eyes, his voice taking on a distant quality, like he was remembering something from long ago. To understand consequences. Tommy didn't know what that meant. But something in Harold's tone suggested the old man had taught this particular lesson before, and it hadn't gone well for the students. A week later, the harassment escalated when Marcus and his crew cornered Harold in the prison library during afternoon recreation time. The library was a small space, 2 walls of donated books, some battered tables and chairs, a quiet refuge for inmates who wanted to escape the noise and tension of the yard. Harold spent most of his free time there, working his way through philosophy texts and historical biographies with patient focus. Brick and 2 of his crew, a scarred man everyone called Knuckles and a younger inmate named Deshawn who was trying to earn his place in Brick's hierarchy, pushed through the library door when they saw Harold alone at a corner table. They moved deliberately, blocking the exit, their body language radiating aggression. The library monitor, an older guard named Williams who was more interested in his crossword puzzle than inmate interactions, conveniently didn't notice. Harold calmly placed his bookmark, a worn piece of cardboard, between the pages of his book and set it on the table. Brick smirked, crossing his arms as he loomed over the seated old man. Tell us what you did on the outside, Pops. What landed you here? Tax problems? Parking tickets? Forgot to return a library book. His crew laughed on cue. Harold looked up at them with steady eyes. I'm retired. Used to train people. The answer was so mundane, so completely unhelpful to their harassment, that it threw Brick off balance for a moment. Train them to do what? Knit? Play bingo? More forced laughter. Harold's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. To survive. The single word, delivered in that same quiet tone, landed differently than Harold's previous responses. There was no fear in it. No attempt to placate or deflect. Just a simple statement of fact. Brick pushed Harold's shoulder hard, trying to provoke a reaction. Survive what? Retirement homes. But this time, something was different. Harold didn't fall. Didn't even wobble. He took one small step back, perfectly balanced, his body absorbing and redirecting the force with minimal effort. Not afraid. Not shaking. Just steady. Brick pushed again, harder. Harold moved with the push, taking another controlled step back, his hands never leaving his sides, his posture remaining relaxed. The 3 bullies froze. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but disciplined. Like pushing against a door that looked old and weak but was actually reinforced steel. Knuckles, who'd been in enough fights to recognize something off, touched Brick's arm. Let's go, man. Williams is watching. The guard wasn't actually watching, still focused on his crossword, but it gave Brick an excuse to retreat without losing face. This ain't over, old man, Brick said as they backed toward the door. But his voice lacked the confident edge it usually carried. Harold simply nodded once and returned to his book, as if the entire interaction had been a mild interruption rather than a threatening confrontation. That night, the rumor mill began working overtime. Tommy was brushing his teeth at the communal sink when Officer Patricia Chen walked past on her rounds. She paused, glanced at the cell assignments on her tablet, and looked at Tommy with something like sympathy. "You're rooming with Harold Grant?" she asked. Tommy nodded, toothbrush still in his mouth. Chen lowered her voice, even though the corridor was mostly empty. "You know who that guy is, right?" Tommy shook his head, suddenly very interested. The officer seemed to debate whether sharing information was appropriate, then decided it didn't matter. The truth would come out eventually. 28 years Special Forces. Army. He was an instructor for SEER training. Tommy's confusion must have shown on his face, because Chen explained survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He taught special operations soldiers how to survive behind enemy lines, how to resist interrogation, how to escape capture. Retired a few years ago with full honors. Decorated multiple times. Tommy felt his toothbrush go slack in his hand. The old man? The trembling, slow, quiet man. That trembling. Chen smiled slightly. Old injuries from his service years. But don't let it fool you. Harold Grant is probably the most dangerous person in this facility, not because he's violent, but because he's had more training in survival and combat than everyone in C-Block combined. Then why is he here? Tommy managed to ask. Over the next several days, something remarkable happened at Riverside Correctional Facility. Marcus and his crew stopped bothering Harold entirely. No more shoves in the hallway. No more stolen food. No more mocking comments. They simply left him alone. But more than that, Brick's entire demeanor began to change. Officers noticed it first. Patricia Chen mentioned to her supervisor, "Brick Sutton's been different lately. Quieter. Less aggressive. Haven't seen him start anything in over a week." "Medical issue?" her supervisor asked. "Don't think so. It's like, he's thinking about things differently." The change became more obvious when, one afternoon during lunch, Brick walked over to Harold's corner table and sat down across from him without asking permission. Harold looked up from his food, raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't say anything. Brick sat in silence for a full minute, his massive hands folded on the table. Other inmates watched nervously, expecting violence. Then, quietly, "Were you really Special Forces?" Harold set down his plastic fork. "A long time ago. Yes." "How'd you deal with fear?" Brick asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In combat, I mean. When things were bad." Harold studied the younger man carefully, seeing something he hadn't noticed before, genuine vulnerability. Brick wasn't asking to gather intelligence or find weakness. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know. "By understanding that fear only controls you if you let it," Harold said finally. "Fear is information. It tells you there's danger. But you get to choose how you respond to that information." Brick nodded slowly, processing this. Then, "I ain't been scared in here since my first month. Learned quick that scared gets you hurt." "So you made yourself the scariest thing in your environment," Harold said. "It wasn't a question. Worked, didn't it?" "Did it?" Harold asked gently. "Or did it just make you lonely?" The words hit Brick like a physical blow. Because they were true. He'd built his reputation, established his dominance, made everyone afraid of him. And in doing so, he'd isolated himself completely. He had followers, but no friends. He had respect, but no trust. He had control, but no peace. "You're not a bad person, Marcus," Harold continued. "You're just afraid people will see who you really are underneath all this." He gestured vaguely at Brick's imposing frame and aggressive posture. Brick swallowed hard, emotions he'd buried for years threatening to surface. "And who's that?" "Someone who's scared," Harold said simply. "Someone who's been scared for a very long time and learned to hide it behind anger and violence. But that person underneath? He's still there. Still reachable. Still capable of being better." Brick sat silently for several minutes while Harold returned to eating his lunch. Finally, the big man stood up and walked away without another word. But 3 days later, Brick surprised everyone by volunteering for kitchen duty, one of the less desirable work assignments that nobody with status ever took. He showed up on time, did the work without complaint, and helped clean up afterward. The week after that, Brick approached a smaller inmate he'd been bullying for months and said quietly, "I'm sorry for how I treated you. It was wrong." The apology was so unexpected, so out of character, that the other inmate thought it was a setup for worse abuse. But nothing happened. Brick just walked away, leaving the shocked man standing there. Over the next month, Marcus Brick Sutton slowly transformed. He stopped leading his crew in harassment campaigns. He started helping in the kitchen regularly. He broke up a fight between 2 younger inmates instead of encouraging it. He began spending his recreation time reading, simple novels at first, his reading level basic from years of neglecting education. And occasionally, he would sit with Harold in the library, not talking, just being in the presence of someone who saw him as capable of change. 4 months after Harold's arrival at Riverside, Warden James Morrison, no relation to Harold's cellmate's surname, called a meeting with his senior staff to discuss an unusual trend. Violence in C Block is down 4 to 7%, he said, studying the reports. Disciplinary infractions are down 32%. And we've had a waiting list for the education program for the first time in 5 years. What's changed? Officer Patricia Chen spoke up. There's an inmate, Harold Grant. He's been. I don't know how to describe it. Teaching, I guess. Teaching what? The warden asked. How to be better, Chen said. Not through classes or formal programs. Just by example. And somehow, it's spreading. The warden looked at Harold's file on his tablet. The Special Forces guy? The one who wouldn't testify. That's him. He's changed several key inmates, including Marcus Sutton. Brick's been mentoring younger inmates now, steering them away from gang recruitment. It's like a ripple effect. The warden shook his head in amazement. One quiet old man accomplished what we couldn't do with policies and programs. Because he's not trying to control them, Chen said. He's showing them they can control themselves. Meanwhile, in the recreation yard, Marcus sat with Harold on their usual bench. They'd developed a routine. Harold would read, Marcus would work through his GED study materials, and occasionally they'd talk. I still don't get it, Marcus said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. Why didn't you fight back? That first day in the cafeteria, or in the library, or the yard. You could have destroyed me. I know that now. So why didn't you? Harold set down his book, A History of the Roman Empire, and looked at the younger man. Because real strength isn't about overpowering someone, Marcus. Real strength is about helping them become better. If I'd fought you, I would have won the battle but lost the opportunity. Opportunity for what? To show you that you didn't need to be what this place expected you to be, Harold said. Prisons are designed around control and punishment. They expect certain behaviors from inmates and they get them. But you're more than what this place tells you to be. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding settling over him. That's what you did, hey? Showed me I could be different. Harold smiled gently. No, Marcus. You did that yourself. I just didn't get in your way. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, thank you, old man, for not giving up on me when I gave everyone else plenty of reasons to. We all deserve second chances, Harold said. Some of us just need someone to hold space for us while we figure out how to take them. When Harold was finally released 18 months later, having served his full sentence, half the inmates in C Block lined up to shake his hand. Even guards said their goodbyes, acknowledging the positive impact he'd had on the facility's atmosphere. Marcus Brick Sutton stood at the front of the line, his eyes red-rimmed but his head held high. He shook Harold's hand firmly. I'm gonna finish my GED, Marcus said. Then I'm taking some college courses through the prison program. Maybe study social work. Help kids before they end up in places like this. Harold gripped his shoulder. You'll be excellent at it. You understand what they're going through because you've been there. Marcus watched through the chain-link fence as Harold walked away from Riverside, a small figure with a slow shuffle and oversized glasses, carrying a single bag of belongings. To anyone watching, he looked like what he'd appeared to be on arrival. A harmless old man who'd made some mistake and served his time. But Marcus knew the truth, and he whispered it to himself as Harold disappeared from view. Thank you, old man, for showing me that real power isn't about control. It's about taking responsibility for who you become. Because in a place built on fear and violence, one calm, disciplined man had taught everyone the truth. Real strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about empowering them to be better. And with nothing but patience, wisdom, and unwavering principles, Harold Grant had changed the toughest bully in Riverside Correctional Facility without throwing a single punch. Thank you for reading this powerful story from Behind Bars Tales. If Harold's quiet strength and Marcus's transformation moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And don't forget to drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. We have viewers from all over the world and we love hearing from you. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that real change comes not through violence, but through patient wisdom and unwavering character. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of transformation from inside America's prison system.